Tyler pulls into the office parking lot every morning at 8:47 in a matte black BMW X5 he leased 11 months ago. The payment is $839 a month on a 36-month term. He parks in the first open spot near the building entrance, not because it's convenient, but because the car is visible from the second-floor conference room where his team meets every Tuesday. Tyler works in corporate marketing. He makes $94,000 a year. When new clients visit, he's the guy who walks them to the elevator, and he makes sure they see the car on the way out. The BMW isn't transportation. It's a business card made of German engineering and monthly payments he can barely afford. Margaret parks in the back corner of the same lot every morning at 8:22. She drives a 2020 Toyota Camry she bought used 3 years ago for $22,400, cash. The car has a small dent on the rear bumper she never bothered to fix because it doesn't affect how the car drives. Margaret works in the same company as Tyler. She's the head of operations. She makes $112,000 a year. Tyler's net worth is negative $17,000. Credit cards, the lease obligation, a personal loan from a vacation he took last summer, and a 401k balance of $8,200 that he's been contributing 2% to since he started. Margaret's net worth is $1.1 million. Tyler looks rich. Margaret is rich. They work in the same building. They earn in the same range. The distance between their financial realities is measured in decades of different decisions, and the single biggest one can be seen sitting in the parking lot every morning. One chose appearance, the other chose accumulation. The car was where the split began. This video is about why the wealthiest people in America consistently, almost universally, drive cars that would surprise you. Not because they can't afford better, because their understanding of money is so fundamentally different from the average person's that the car becomes the most visible expression of the philosophy that made them wealthy in the first place. Let's get into it. The median price paid by millionaires for their most recent vehicle purchase was $31,367. For decamillionaires, people with $10 million or more, it was $41,997. That data comes from Thomas Stanley's National Survey of Millionaires, one of the most comprehensive studies of wealthy Americans ever conducted. Let me put that in context. The average new car transaction price in America has climbed past $48,000. That means the average American is paying more for their car than the average millionaire paid for theirs. An Experian automotive study found that 61% of people earning more than $250,000 a year drive Hondas, Toyotas, and Fords. 61%. These are households pulling in $250,000 annually, people who could comfortably write a check for a Range Rover, and the majority of them are driving to work in a Civic, a Camry, or an F-150. Only 39% of those high-earning households chose luxury brands at all. The top car brand among millionaires? Toyota, followed by Honda, then Ford. Mercedes didn't show up until fourth. BMW fifth. Only 23.5% of millionaires owned a car from the current model year, according to Stanley's research. More than half drove cars that were over 2 years old. The average millionaire drives a vehicle that's approximately 4 years old with about 1,000 miles. These aren't people who can't afford new. These are people who understand something about money that most Americans have been culturally trained to ignore. Cars are the single most destructive wealth killer in the American consumer economy outside of housing. And unlike housing, which at least has the potential to appreciate over time, a car begins losing value the instant you sign the paperwork. A new vehicle loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone. By year 5, it's lost about 40%. By year 7, most cars are worth less than a third of their original sticker price. The average new car payment in America hit $767 a month at the end of 2025, according to Experian. Many Americans now carry payments above $1,000. 84-month loan terms, 7 full years of payments, are becoming normalized. This means a significant number of Americans are making payments on a vehicle that is worth less than what they owe on it for the majority of the loan's life. They're underwater, they owe more than the car is worth, and they're making this payment every single month instead of investing that money in something that grows. Let me show you the math, because the math is where this gets violent. Tyler leases his BMW X5 at $839 a month. Over his 36-month lease term, he pays $30,204. At the end, he owns nothing. He returns the car and signs a new lease because going back to a modest car would feel like a downgrade. He'll do this for roughly 30 years of his working life, paying an average of $800 a month for a car he never owns. Margaret bought her Camry for $22,400 in cash. She'll drive it for 8 years. Her total cost of ownership, including maintenance, insurance differential, and the purchase price, works out to roughly $330 a month over the life of the vehicle. After 8 years, the car is still running. She sells it for $9,000, buys another used Camry for $23,000, and repeats the cycle. The monthly difference between Tyler's approach and Margaret's approach is roughly $500. $500 a month. Invested at 8% average annual returns over 30 years, that $500 monthly difference grows to approximately $745,000. Read that number again. $745,000. That's not a hypothetical. That's the mathematical consequence of the gap between an $800 car payment and a $300 car payment compounded over a career. It's the difference between retiring with options and retiring with anxiety. It's the difference between financial freedom at 60 and financial dependence at 75. From a car. From the thing sitting in your driveway right now that you chose based on how it would look to other people. Margaret's $1.1 million net worth didn't come from a secret investment strategy or a family inheritance. 88% of American millionaires are self-made, according to the Ramsey Solutions National Study of Millionaires. Margaret is one of them. She built her wealth through the gap between what she earns and what she spends, and the car is where she protects the largest single piece of that gap. Her car choice alone is responsible for roughly $600,000 of her total net worth, over half of everything she has, from a single recurring decision she made decades ago and has simply repeated every 8 years since. The Ramsey study found that 94% of millionaires consistently lived below their means. Only 31% averaged a 6-figure income over their careers. 1/3 never earned $100,000 in any single working year. The top 5 professions among those millionaires were engineer, accountant, teacher, management, and attorney. Teachers. People culturally perceived as underpaid were showing up on millionaire lists more frequently than surgeons and tech executives. Because the profession doesn't determine the outcome. The gap does. And the car is where most Americans blow the gap wide open. This is not financial advice. But I want you to understand why the car specifically, among all possible spending categories, is the one that separates wealthy people from everyone else more cleanly than almost anything. There are 3 reasons. The first is magnitude. A car payment is typically the second largest monthly expense in an American household after housing. $767 a month is more than most people spend on groceries. It's more than most people invest. It's more than most people save. When the single line item is inflated by $300, $400, $500 above what's necessary for reliable transportation, the excess consumption overwhelms every other financial behavior. You can cancel all your subscriptions, brew coffee at home every day, pack your lunch religiously, and negotiate every bill, And the savings from all of those combined still won't offset the difference between a $400 car payment and a $900 car payment. The car is the big rock. The lattes are pebbles. Most financial advice focuses on the pebbles because pebbles are easier to talk about. The big rock is where the money actually is. The second is duration. Unlike a vacation or a dinner or a new jacket, a car payment lasts for years. 60 months, 72 months, 84 months. It's a recurring extraction from your financial life that runs on autopilot for the better part of a decade, and because it's automatic, your brain habituates to it. By month 6, you don't feel the payment anymore. It's just part of your financial landscape. You've adjusted your spending around it. You've accepted it as a fixed cost of being alive. Except it's not fixed. It was a choice. A single choice you made on a single afternoon at a dealership that now costs you $767 every month for 7 years, while the asset it purchased loses half its value. The third reason is social pressure. No other consumer purchase carries the same weight of social identity as a car. Your car is seen by your neighbors, by your coworkers, by the person you're dating, by the valet, by your parents when you pull into their driveway at Thanksgiving. It communicates a story about who you are, how much you earn, and how well you're doing. That story is almost always fiction, but the audience doesn't know that. The audience sees a BMW and assumes wealth. The audience sees a 2020 Camry and assumes middle class at best. The social mathematics of car ownership are so deeply embedded in American culture that most people would rather be broke in a nice car than solvent in a boring one. Tyler is one of those people. His BMW costs him $839 a month, plus $347 in insurance, since luxury vehicles carry higher premiums, plus premium fuel at roughly $20 to $30 more per month than regular. His total monthly car expense is over $1,200. On a $94,000 salary, that's roughly 15% of his gross income going to a depreciating asset. Financial planners typically recommend that total transportation costs, including payment, insurance, fuel, and maintenance, should stay below 10% of gross income. Tyler is 50% above that threshold every month for 3 years. Then he'll start again. Margaret's total monthly car expense, averaged over the life of ownership, is about $480, including payment amortization, insurance, fuel, and maintenance. On her $112,000 salary, that's roughly 5% of her gross income. She's half the recommended threshold. The gap between 5% and 15% on a $100,000 range income is roughly $8,300 a year. That's the annual wealth transfer from Tyler's future to the leasing company, the insurance company, and the gas station. Every year, decade after decade. While Margaret takes that same $8,300 and feeds it into an index fund that compounds at 8% until the number on her screen stops making sense. Here's something that hit me hard when I first read it. In The Millionaire Next Door, Thomas Stanley wrote about a specific group of millionaires he called used vehicle-prone shoppers. These were millionaires who consistently bought used cars instead of new. They had the highest frugality scores of any group in his database. They also had the highest net worth to income ratios. The highest, meaning dollar for dollar of income earned, the used car millionaires accumulated more wealth than any other subgroup of millionaires in the study. They invested a larger percentage of their annual income than any other group. They were the most aggressive savers, the most disciplined investors, and the most resistant to lifestyle inflation. Stanley's conclusion was direct. Being frugal was a major reason members of the used vehicle prone group were wealthy. Their frugality provided them with a dollar base to invest. They weren't frugal despite being wealthy. They were wealthy because they were frugal. The car wasn't a sacrifice, it was the source. Let me introduce you to a few real examples because I think it's important to see this principle operating at scale. Warren Buffett, the sixth richest person on the planet, at various points in recent years, drove a 2014 Cadillac X that he purchased with hail damage. Hail damage. A man worth over $100 billion bought a car with dents from a storm because he saw no reason to pay full price for something cosmetic. Mark Zuckerberg has been photographed driving an Acura TSX and a Volkswagen Golf GT, vehicles in the $25,000 to $35,000 range. Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA and one of the wealthiest people in European history, drove a 1993 Volvo 240 until well into the 2000s. These aren't publicity stunts. These are behavioral patterns consistent with how these individuals think about money fundamentally. A car to them is a tool, a piece of metal that moves you from one location to another. The moment it becomes a statement, it becomes a liability not just financially, but psychologically. Because you're now making financial decisions based on what other people think instead of what actually builds your life. Sarah Stanley Falla, the director of research for the Affluent Market Institute and daughter of Thomas Stanley, surveyed over 600 millionaires for her book, The Next Millionaire Next Door. She found frugality was one of their chief characteristics. Her most quoted line from the book applies directly to the car conversation. Spending above your means, spending instead of saving for retirement, spending in anticipation of becoming wealthy, makes you a slave to the paycheck, even with a stellar level of income. That phrase, spending in anticipation of becoming wealthy, describes Tyler perfectly. He drives the BMW because he believes he's on his way to being wealthy, and the car is a preview of the life he's building. Except the car is preventing the life he's building. Every $839 that flows to the leasing company is $839 that doesn't flow to his 401k, his Roth IRA, or his brokerage account. He's performing the future while destroying it. The preview is consuming the feature film. I want to address something directly because I can hear the objection forming in some of your minds right now. But I need a reliable car. A cheap car will just break down and cost me more. You get what you pay for. Let me dismantle this with data. Consumer Reports reliability rankings consistently show that Toyota, Honda, and Mazda are among the most reliable brands on the road. These are the same brands that millionaires drive. A 2020 Toyota Camry, which you can buy used right now for roughly $18,000 to $22,000 depending on trim and mileage, will reliably transport you for 200,000 miles or more with standard maintenance. A 2020 Honda Civic costs even less and delivers similar longevity. These aren't beaters. They're not rusted-out gambles. They're engineered to last longer than most car loans. The cheap cars breakdown argument applies to vehicles purchased for $3,000 or $4,000 with no inspection and 150,000 miles already on the odometer. Nobody is suggesting that. The sweet spot that millionaires occupy is a used vehicle in the $15,000 to $30,000 range, 2 to 4 years old, from a brand known for reliability, purchased with cash or financed modestly over 36 months maximum. This gives you a vehicle that's past the steepest depreciation curve, under warranty or close to it, and built to run for another decade with basic care. A Wall Street Journal study found that 35% of respondents believed you needed to drive a car costing $75,000 or more to qualify as rich. When Thomas Stanley applied that threshold to his millionaire database, more than 90% of them would have failed to qualify. 90% of actual millionaires don't drive cars that the public associates with wealth. The gap between the perception and the reality is the entire point of this video. Let me run one more scenario because I want you to see the lifetime cost of this decision across both paths. Person A finances a new $48,000 car at 7% APR for 72 months. monthly payment $816, total paid over the loan $58,752. At the end of 6 years, the car is worth roughly $19,000. Net cost $39,752. Person A then trades it in and repeats the cycle with another new car. Over 30 years, assuming 5 cycles, Person A spends approximately $198,760 on cars, not counting insurance premiums, fuel, and maintenance. They never own a paid-off vehicle for more than a few months between trade-ins. Person B buys a 3-year-old certified pre-owned vehicle for $22,000 with cash, drives it for 8 years, sells it for $7,000. Net cost $15,000 over 8 years, or $156 a month. Over 30 years, Person B goes through roughly 4 cars. Total spent approximately $60,000. Net lifetime saving versus Person A, roughly $138,000. But the real number is much larger than that because Person B invested the monthly difference. The gap between Person A's $816 and Person B's $156 is $660 a month. Invested at 8% over 30 years, that $660 a month grows to approximately $983,000, nearly $1 million, from a car choice. From the decision to drive a Toyota instead of financing whatever the dealership said you qualified for. That's why millionaires drive $30,000 cars. It's not discipline for the sake of discipline. It's not deprivation or cheapness or an unwillingness to enjoy life. It's math. Brutal, compounding, relentless math that either works for you or against you, depending on which side of the car payment you're standing on. Now I want to talk about the psychological architecture of this decision, because the math alone doesn't explain why most Americans ignore it. If the math were sufficient, everyone would drive used Camrys and retire wealthy. They don't. Something else is operating underneath the spreadsheet, and understanding it is the key to actually changing the behavior. The car is an identity anchor. For most Americans, your car is the most visible daily expression of your economic status. Your house is seen by your neighbors, your clothes are seen by the people in your immediate proximity, but your car is seen by everyone. In traffic, in parking lots, in drive-thrus, at the school pickup line, dropping someone off on a first date. It broadcasts a message about who you are to hundreds of people per day. And because we live in a culture that equates visible spending with success, the message a new BMW sends is, this person is doing well. The message a 2020 Camry sends is, this person is getting by. The irony is suffocating. The Camry driver is statistically more likely to be the millionaire. The BMW driver is statistically more likely to be underwater on the lease. But humans don't evaluate financial health statistically. They evaluate it visually. So the person building wealth looks ordinary, and the person destroying wealth looks impressive. And the cultural feedback loop reinforces the destruction because everyone around you is making the same mistake and interpreting your participation as validation. Tyler gets compliments on his BMW. Nobody has ever complimented Margaret on her Camry. Tyler's car generates social approval. Margaret's car generates nothing. But Margaret's investment account generates roughly 8% per year, compounding silently in the background while Tyler collects compliments that cost him $839 a month. When you understand this dynamic, the psychology of the car purchase flips completely. The person driving the modest car isn't the person who can't afford better. They're the person who understands that the compliment economy is a trap. Every dollar spent on a car that impresses strangers is a dollar removed from the account that builds your freedom. The wealthy have made peace with being unimpressive to people who will never know or care about their actual financial position. This is what Sarah Stanley Fala meant when she wrote about spending in anticipation of becoming wealthy. The car is the anticipation made physical. It's a down payment on an identity you haven't earned yet, financed with money you need for the wealth that would actually support that identity. The tragedy is that the act of buying the car pushes the identity further away. Every lease payment widens the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you could actually become. Let me bring this home with one final contrast between Tyler and Margaret, because I think there's a version of both of them in every person watching this. Tyler is 34. If he switched from his $839 lease to a paid-off used car tomorrow and invested the difference for the next 26 years until he's 60, at 8% returns, that redirected payment would grow to approximately $873,000. Tyler would arrive at retirement with nearly $900,000 in additional wealth from a single behavioral change. One decision. Not a career change, not a side hustle, not a complicated investment strategy, just a different car. Margaret is 47. She's been investing the car gap since she was 26. 21 years of $500 to $600 a month, quietly compounding. Her car gap portfolio alone, separate from her 401k and Roth, is worth roughly $368,000. She expects to retire at 58. Tyler, on his current trajectory, will work until 67 and arrive with roughly a third of what Margaret has. He'll spend his retirement wondering what happened. What happened was the parking lot. What happened was visible every single morning at 8:47 when he pulled his leased BMW into the spot nearest the building so the conference room could see it. Here's what I want you to take from this. The car you drive is not a financial detail. It's a financial philosophy expressed in monthly payments. It tells you everything about how someone thinks about money, what they prioritize, and whether they're building wealth or performing it. The wealthiest people in America understood this early. Most of them understood it before they were wealthy, which is precisely why they became wealthy. The Ramsey Solutions study found that only 31% of millionaires averaged six-figure incomes. 69% never averaged $100,000 a year over their careers. They got rich on moderate salaries by doing one thing that most Americans refuse to do. They lived below their means. And the car was ground zero for that choice. You don't need a $100,000 salary to build wealth. You might already earn enough. The question is whether you understand which decisions are costing you the most over a lifetime and whether you're willing to choose differently once you see the math. Because here's what connects this decision to every other financial decision you'll ever make. The car is rarely an isolated mistake. The person who finances a $50,000 car is usually the same person who's under-contributing to their 401k, carrying credit card balances, skipping the Roth IRA, and living without an emergency fund. The car didn't cause all of those problems, but it reveals the philosophy that causes all of them. The philosophy that says, I deserve this now, instead of I'm building something that lasts. The philosophy that prioritizes what people see over what actually compounds. Changing the car changes the philosophy. When you drive a car that's below your means, something shifts in how you think about every other financial decision. You start seeing money differently. The subscription feels less automatic. The lifestyle creep feels less inevitable. The retirement contribution feels less painful. Because the biggest, most visible, most socially significant spending decision you make has already been aligned with wealth building. Once the big rock moves, the pebbles follow. And this is where understanding becomes everything. Because the car is just one version of a trap that exists at every stage of your financial life. In your 20s, the trap might be student loans or the first apartment that stretches your budget. In your 30s, it's the car and the house, the two decisions that lock in your expenses for years. In your 40s, it's the lifestyle that's now cemented, the the spending baseline you can't seem to lower because it's become who you are. In your 50s, it's the realization that time is running out and the compounding curve needed 20 more years. Each age has its own version of the mistake. The car is the 30s trap. The house is the 40s trap. The undersaving is the 50s trap. The people who build wealth are the people who saw each trap before it arrived. They knew what was coming. They studied the map. They understood the specific financial decisions at each stage of life that separate the people who retire comfortably from the people who retire scared. That understanding isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one concept at a time. Financial literacy. The knowledge of how money actually moves through your life over decades. How compound interest turns $500 a month into $1 million. How a car payment that looks manageable at 30 quietly costs you $900,000 by 60. How every spending decision has two prices: the price you pay today and the price you pay in lost compounding over the decades that follow. The millionaires driving $30,000 cars aren't just saving money. They're applying a philosophy that touches every corner of their financial lives. They understand the math. They understand the traps. They understand that every age carries a specific financial decision that either builds the next decade or undermines it. Margaret understood this at 26. Tyler still doesn't understand it at 34. The difference between them isn't income, talent, or luck. It's awareness. Margaret was aware of what the car would cost her over a lifetime. Tyler is aware of what it looks like in the parking lot this morning. One of those perspectives builds a life. The other builds an impression. Choose carefully, because the parking lot forgets your car the moment you pull away. Your investment account remembers every dollar you gave it or didn't for the rest of your life.